Everyone, I want to welcome you back. Today, I thought I would just give you a preview of what's going to be in the next video. In this past one, we talked about a lot of things, and part of it being the weapon that was used. Well, in this next video, we're going to take a much deeper dive into that particular weapon. The TBI thought it to be either an M1 or an M2 carbine. Now, the M1 and M2 are a World War II era weapon. Now, they were also used in the Korean conflict as well as for a short time in Vietnam. It's a light 30 caliber weapon. It was easy to use. A lot of especially officers like to carry it because it was so lightweight, carried more rounds than the M1 Garand, which was a much heavier weapon. I think you could get 15 round magazines and some 30 round magazines for the M1, whereas the Garand only had 8 rounds per magazine. The M1 fires a shell that is a little bit lighter than the 30-06 style that the M1 Garand would fire, but it's still a very deadly weapon depending on what you want to use. So what we're going to do first is take a brief look at what an M1 looks like when it's used. And again, it's a semi-automatic, meaning you have to pull the trigger each time that a round is to be fired. And I want you to pay particular attention to the way that it ejects the shell casings from the gun. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the M2, which is the fully automatic version of the M1. Now, with it, you can either fire it as a semi-automatic or a fully automatic, simply by using the selector switch. In the semi-automatic version, you have to pull the trigger one time for each shell that you want to be fired. Whereas if you have the setting on the fully automatic version, you depress the trigger, hold it, and it will just keep firing until you release the trigger or the magazine runs out. So take a
lean into it.
Okay, one thing I hope everybody paid attention to was the manner in which the M1 ejected shell casings as opposed to the way that the M2 ejected shell casings. Of course, the M1 being the semi-automatic version of the weapon ejected them one direction, as the M2, firing much, much faster, ejected them in a totally different fashion. And all this will play into Buford's story, and more to the point, where the shell casings were located. But we'll get into that this next week. Also, we're going to do a very basic reconstruction. Now, we don't have a Cadillac and we don't have a 67 Fury, but one of the things that we're going to take a look at is how the shooting probably took place. And I think that'll give everyone a certain insight into what may or may not have happened, depending upon your point of view. We'll talk about where the bullets struck the car and why it's so significant. We'll also talk about time and motion. And this gets into Buford's story that he is chased down by the Cadillac and how it caught up with him in 2 different locations. And we'll question where it was in between those 2 locations. Then there is the issue of blood on the vehicle. It was all over the vehicle basically. But there were 2 types of blood involved in this. And we assume that one was Buford and one was Pauline's, but where blood was found has to be significant in the investigation. Then there's also the issue of Buford's handprints being outside on the car. Of course, he insisted that neither he nor Pauline ever exited the vehicle, but yet he's got his palm prints. that are on the outside of the car, and they're bloodied. So why does that not make sense if you listen to Buford's story? Then there's also missing time. We had two issues of time that is missing from the story. Once between the time that he left the house until the ambush took place at 4:45, and then you have another hour and a half from the time the ambush took place until that he was located in Eastview. Now, what went on during that time? That is something that we really need to discuss, because there is a lot of time missing here and it doesn't make sense at all. So we'll talk about what all this means to Buford's story about how the ambush occurred. And, we may even get into a discussion about who these people were that he said were from all over the United States. It doesn't make sense for an organized crime ring, say like a regular mafia type situation, that they would descend on McNairy County, which only had a total population of around 18,000. And that included men, women, and children. And when you break that down and you think, okay, you've got, in most households, you have a husband and wife, and then you have a couple of children, if not more. Well, that leaves the adult population of McNairy County at the time at only around 9,000. And then when you break it down further and you're sitting there thinking that a lot of these people were God-fearing, church-going people that didn't hang out at the state line. So you have to wonder why people are coming from all over the United States to basically cater to a crowd of or a population of around 4,500 people. Of course, there were people coming up from the Mississippi side, but could it be that many more, that so many organized crime people would descend on such a small place when you could go to New Orleans or Dallas, Chicago, wherever, that there was a large population and do far, far better monetarily? So we'll get into all those issues. We'll discuss it and see what we can make of it. But until then, have a good one. And just remember, the truth has no agenda.